Welcome to Slate School and our conversation with our favorite authors and illustrators about the importance of great literature for children. We have four phenomenal panelists tonight, and we are looking forward to all of the insight that they'll be sharing with us today. So I'll share a little bit about Slate School before we begin. Slate School is committed to excellence in education, and we are delighted to present the Education Idea Lab, which is a unique virtual series that is free and open to the public. This thought-leading event convenes leaders and change makers and participants from all sectors of education and innovation. So thank you for joining us. We're thrilled to have all of you with us here tonight. My name is Julie Mountcastle, and I'm head of school at Slate School. So I'll briefly introduce you to Slate School, and we'll hear a little bit then on our way to hearing from our expert panelists. So Slate School is an independent 501c3 nonprofit K-12 school where education is focused on creativity, fostering ingenuity, and inspiring a deep passion for lifelong learning. At Slate School, we formed a community that is constantly striving to improve practice, to create meaningful educational experiences for learners of all ages, and to change the landscape in education. Slate School convenes experts for important, authentic conversations about education, and these online dialogues, just like tonight's, are free and open to the public. So we're so delighted to have all of you with us today. Our panelists tonight are Boyle, John Himmelmann, Kobi Yamada, and Paul Zelinsky. So I would love for all of the panelists, each of you, to briefly introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about your journey to becoming one of our favorite authors and illustrators. And then we'll move on to our panel conversation. Oh, and also throughout the panel conversation, we would invite you, our audience, to submit questions as comments here on Facebook, and we will try to address as many of those as possible. So I'm going to go in reverse alphabetical order. So Paul Zelinsky, tell us about yourself.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you for that. And it's great to be here, and it's nice to meet all of you other panelists and everybody here. I grew up as a Z, very much at the end of the alphabet, and also the shortest kid in my class, so that anything that was ordered, I'd come last. So I, as the shortest kid in my class, I was also kind of, I found that I could draw, and drawing was a really good way to be more popular than I would have been otherwise, I guess. So so I was pretty much the class artist, and I wasn't surprised that when I went to college that I would be an art major. But I was kind of thinking, art, you don't, as an art major, what do you do? The presumption was that you get a degree and then you teach art so that you can teach other people to be MFAs, so that they can teach other people to get MFAs. That was the sort of thing. And that was my plan, I guess. And in fact, I did get an MFA. I have a master's in painting, and I started to teach in California for a while. And that was when I really discovered what a terrible teacher I was, and I was not cut out for this. And I had a plan B, though, because while I was in college, I started illustrating. I shouldn't take too long on this. We have to go through all four people, but it was a dirty word, illustration, in the art department at Yale, where I went, where it was a very serious oriented art school, and I didn't even tell my teachers that my uncle, who worked at the New York Times, had said, "Why don't you come make an appointment with the art editor here? Maybe they want some of your drawings." So I did. So I took a bus from New Haven and went to this place, and he showed me, and I left with an assignment. So suddenly, I was an illustrator. And the year after that, there appeared in the course catalog a seminar, a small course in children's book writing and illustrating. And I thought that was really cool. And maybe that could be something I could do if it didn't pan out to be a teacher. The course was being taught by an English professor together with Maurice Sendak.
Oh,
And yeah, and I knew who he was. And it was a really great and life-changing experience. And that, I think, is how I ended up being where I am today.
it's so funny, Paul. Don't they normally say if you can't do teach, isn't teaching supposed to be the backup?
Well,
In the
I,
opposite direction.
my wife is a teacher, and I'm very aware of how teaching is a talent all its own. It's an incredible thing, and it's a gift. She's an incredibly gifted teacher, and I'm not.
All right, all right. I'll take your word for it. And maybe we'll see if she wants a job at Slate School because she's not that far away. Uh, Kobi, tell us about yourself. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Really, really happy to be here. And I can already tell I'm going to enjoy this panel just from listening to Paul. But I'm out in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, so out just outside of Seattle. And, my journey to kids' books is not necessarily a direct route either. I'm the president and CEO of a company called Compendium. And really at the heart of everything we do is inspiration. And so the picture book just was one of the outlets and one of the ideas that came from actually watching our own creative teams talking about new ideas. And the next morning I wrote What Do You Do With an Idea as my first picture book, just because I thought there needed to be maybe a bigger conversation about the fragility of the journey of an idea. But I think that, in my case, I write books for really people of all ages. I feel like my books are incomplete without the reader. And so it's really just a tool to spark conversation and discussion about topics, and it might be about courage or creativity or, different aspects of life. But I love the way that a picture book can both simplify and expand the conversation at the same time.
Beautiful. That's great. It's a great response. All right, John Himmelmann, next up. Welcome.
Thank you. Actually, my start is similar to Paul's, where I went to School of Visual Arts 4 years, getting ready to graduate, not having any idea what I'm going to do with an art degree. My wife was going to school to be an art teacher, and she is an art teacher. And I said, maybe I'll become an art teacher. She said, no, you have to want to teach. You can't just use that as a fallback. You can't just say, well, I don't know how to be an artist. I'm going to be a teacher. How's that? So I took that to heart, and I took a course in writing and illustrating children's books in the last half of the last year of college, taught by Dale Payson. She had done about 40 books. I did a story in the class, and she liked it, showed it to her editor at Dial. They took it, and that was my first book, and I've been doing it since. And I had taken that course because I had to commute to New York City from Long Island every day, and I read a lot of books, and I read a lot of children's books, and I saw a way to combine telling stories with drawing pictures, both things that I enjoyed doing. How else do you really get to do that? You get to do that in picture books. So it's been 40 years, and I'm still plugging away.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Hi, Doe.
Hi. Delighted to be here with all of you guys, and really honored. I just, like all of you, lifelong reader and learner, and I work with three hats. So I write children's books. I also write in the adult marketplace and nonfiction and, sort of magazine journalism, that kind of thing. But I actually have a longer career as a developmental editor of adult nonfiction and children's fiction, sort of as a sideline, but professionally adult nonfiction. And since 1997, I've been working with the Connecticut Office of the Arts as a master teaching artist. So I teach across the curriculum, sort of an arts integration, cross-curricular approach. And now working with Arts for Learning Connecticut. So I teach from grade, K through 12. I'm honored to do that, always challenged to do that. And I tend to prefer to write for very young readers. I sometimes will tell kids facetiously that I grew up a nosy busybody. I was one of the kids who was up before dawn and often home late for dinner, and loved to be just out in the world. I kind of was a wanderer as a child, an explorer, and one of those kids who was one of the listeners on the stairs, if you know what I mean, if you're familiar with the A.A. Milne poem about, kind of eavesdropping on the adult conversations below stairs. I was one of those kids who spread myself out quietly on the staircase and listened. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Lovely, lovely. Gosh, I've got so many questions, and I guess I'm just curious about this, since we're sort of talking about your lives as writers. I'm curious, who reads your book first? Who looks
My
at what
wife.
you've done first? Your
My
wife?
wife, yeah.
Do you have so how about you, Kobi? Who do you give your work to? Do you give your work to?
Yeah, I love bouncing my ideas off my wife. She's intelligent, fun, interesting audience. But and then I think it's probably our editorial team that we really dive a little deeper with it as well. But yeah, it's always those first moments, right, of wondering if someone's gonna think it's any good or not, and so that's always the precarious spot. But it's luckily for me, I've got a nice, safe environment that way.
Well, that's so important, right? I think whatever we're doing, I think I see that here, certainly with my students. We spend the whole first 6 weeks of school working on developing a safe space, because obviously if you're teaching, if you're 6 and you're teaching other people about whatever it is you're passionate about, you have to feel confident about making mistakes and being able to share things in ways that leave you feeling revealed, actually. And I think, a lot of the work that you all do is I don't know, there's a common theme that in your writing, that there's an incredible kindness about it. Some things are hilariously funny, but there's kindness in it. There's real kindness. At Slate School, we say that we don't want to introduce children to the unkindness of the world before they've experienced it. And oftentimes, instead of a focus on kindness, we see, and I'm going to just say, we see some unnecessary conflict sometimes in children's books, and even for the youngest children. And it can be really challenging, I think, for kids who don't really know of the world being an unkind place, to hear about it from a book. But I've heard that sometimes this comes from the pressure of editors or publishers, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Who's that to?
Well, that could be to all of you, actually. Yeah, because I wonder. I mean, I know I've had a little conversation with Doe about this, so I know that she's got a particular feeling about it, but I would like to hear from all of you if you think that's a thing, or if that's just a Slate School perception.
I think it depends on what you mean and how you interpret what did you say? Unnecessary unkindness?
The unkindness of the world. Yeah, the unkindness of the world.
Well, I don't know. I think that for those children who have not been exposed to unkindness, it is a kindness to them not to gratuitously expose them to it. At the same time, there are a lot of children who've been through medium unkind things and horrendous unkind things, and
Dramatic things.
the books that are often coming out that I think you may be referring to may be lifesavers to them and very helpful to them. And I haven't I've never heard a publisher say, let's put some more unkindness in here. So I'm not sure what that is. I'd be curious to know.
I think that word gratuitous you used it's a good term. I mean, there's unkind things in the world, and they do get. I mean, there are unkind things in children's stories, but again, if it's done for shock value or that I can't, again, the best word is gratuitous, then that's a little bit different. But I think solving problems it's a real thing, and that's
Absolutely.
what they have to do.
And I think there are a lot of problems that do not revolve around the unkindness of others too.
Mhm.
There are a lot of real problems. I mean, I'm sitting here, you can't see it, but I'm sitting here beneath something that we call the learning journey. It's a piece of rope, and it goes up and down and up and down and up and down. And we talk about it all the time here because we know that life is challenging. And the kids now, in first and second grade will come to me and they'll point to a spot on the learning journey and they'll say, I'm here, Mrs. Mountcastle. And it's really rough. And I'll say, you know what? I know that there are other people that feel that they're in that spot too. And so, just ask, anybody else feel like they're really struggling with their project or with something today? Let's have a little chat and see how we can support each other and get through it. It's not that there aren't challenges. It's, I just think that there are some, I don't know. This is
I'll say that when I was a kid, I hated I Love Lucy. I don't know if everybody still knows I Love Lucy, but I really disliked it because because of that unkindness, because there was so much pain in it that you were supposed to laugh at. And I just didn't really. So I guess maybe I just don't have a good enough sense of humor, but I see.
I doubt that's true.
The point, but I also think that there is a lot of sort of pain and issues of people not doing the right thing that do belong in books, that I think children are capable of sort of keeping things in context, and not everyone is capable of everything and ever, and I think with a wide range of books that I think should be published, there's an absolute right for any parent to sort of give their child the ones they want and keep them. I mean, I've done books that I know have frightened children. My fairy tale books have, in some cases, been scary to kids, and in other cases, they have not been. Different kids.
Right. I think that's it. No, you know your audience.
Mm-hmm.
You know your audience, and as someone who's choosing a book, just because a book is successful doesn't necessarily mean that book is for your child.
Absolutely not. No.
And I think that's an important piece.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of audience, John, I think you know your audience so well. I think you really understand what children find funny. You just really, I mean, they get a really good laugh at your stuff. But I think also you're sharing some pretty deep things. And I'm just wondering what comes first, the lesson or the comedy?
But usually the feeling, what I want to convey. I think one thing I'm able to do well is I have, my memory goes back really far into childhood, and not details, but how things made me feel. And that doesn't change over time. A sad kid from 300 years ago feels the same as a sad kid today. And I tap into that when I'm writing. I basically write for myself, even though in the back of my head I know it's for younger people than myself. But I'm the first audience. I'm sure that's the same with most. It's almost a cliche. But if it makes me laugh, it makes the child in me laugh. I would hope that it would make another child laugh, and that's the goal, is to have them go along with you, to get them to feel, or if it makes them sad. I did a book called Ibis: A True Whale Story. And I would get letters for years how it made people cry. But it had a happy ending. You got to bring it around for the kids. But being able to make a child feel by reading a story, I think it's a gift, a gift for a child. And I know that I received that gift in the books that I read by other writers.
I would agree with that too. Ibis is still on my shelf, John, and very happily, I'm very glad that it's there. And I would just, revisit the idea of gentleness, let's say, or as Julie put it, kindness. There is kind of a trope, you might say, like sort of maybe in the industry of children's picture books, that there must be a story arc, right? There kind of has to be a problem or a need, something has to be fixed, and someone has to learn and grow. And so that is where we sometimes can get caught up on the idea that every story has to have a conflict. I tend to think that, every story perhaps maybe needs a challenge. There needs to be some kind of a sense of adventure, some kind of a sense of, progress. And I tend to rest more on, the progress of our emotional intelligence. So, it doesn't need to be necessarily, or at least I'm not going to necessarily write about strife, let's say, to use a little bit of an old-fashioned word, but I might write about adventure and challenge. I might write about learning and growing, and more than likely, just given who I am and what my interests are, I'm also going to write about wonder and curiosity, so that the implication is always that there's a question with an answer. So there's the capacity for learning and growing in every story.
Your arc, in other words, your arc is from question to answer.
Yeah.
I think that's really nicely said. That
I like that. Yeah.
What your point, and also that there is this idea of sort of this formula for what makes a story is current. It's there's a script writer who goes around with a program that people sign up for, and it works apparently. It really, as a formula, it really does a number on our brains, and when you plug those things in, you get something that feels like a story, where a lot of things don't feel like a story. But to me, the measure really shouldn't be, is there a conflict? Does he have an arc that goes in the correct shape that this seminar told you it should go in? But just that, I mean, what you said, John, it's the feeling at the end of it. You should feel like that was a story. That's the goal. And however you get to that goal, there are always going to be different ways to do it.
Yeah, I would agree that I think it's really about emotional engagement. If you're going to have a book be significant or memorable or something that hopefully somebody can carry with them, and maybe even the book can grow with them as they grow as human beings, because I think the books are on a number of levels, the good ones, and that it means a little something different to people as they're going through different things in their lives. So as far as the idea of the unkindness, or are we artificially creating some of that strife, as Joe said, I think it's good sometimes to have conversations in books about some things that a child might face, and to see that it's not always just truth, right? Criticism isn't always just truth. Negativity isn't just truth. It's sometimes it's just opinion, and it also can be things where someone's maybe, as I think Paul really intelligently said, some people have gone through some really difficult things even at an early age, and that really does color the way that they look at things and the way they might react to things. We can have some compassion for that too. I think we can all agree that Slate School sounds amazing, and we wish all kids could go to a school like Slate School, right? And so, but that's not actually the case for everyone. And so, sometimes some of those books are resources for some of those kids that are needing them. So I think that the audience is very diversified and very, very broad. And I don't think I would hope anyway, there's not anybody in the children's publishing that's just out to scare and scar kids. I think that, you're just trying to find different places to engage and make it meaningful and memorable for them at maybe a young age, and maybe it's a tool and something they refer back to as they get older.
Awesome. We definitely agree that we wish all kids could go to a school like Slate School. And Slate School is it's a unique place, and it's unique in that this is a school for everybody. I mean, one of the real missions of our school is that it's 100% need blind and meets 100% of demonstrated need for every accepted student. So nearly 90% of the students here receive a lot of financial assistance. So a school like Slate School, which sadly, traditionally is a school for people who can afford it. One of the ways that we really want to shift the idea of education and the landscape is by saying that this is a model that can happen and be for everyone. And it does not have to be an elite experience. In fact, the community that we have here is quite incredible. So we hope that other people will start their own version of Slate School. Not that it will be a cookie cutter, everybody go around and do, what we do, but to do what moves them as educators, but to do it in a way that allows for everybody to have access to it. Now it's a small number, but it does have that piece where it is for anyone who wants to come.
Cool.
So you'll go ahead.
I mean, in regard to what Kobi was saying, and to my thinking that it would be really nice if we were talking, and if we had examples actually, and not just we're talking about generalities, but the book that I have just come out that I illustrated is really a case in point where I have been concerned about questions of kindness and questions of exposing children to painful things, and it seems to be that people are reacting very well to it, but it's about it's about an anti-Semitic incident that happened in real life in Montana, inspired, sort of fictionalized from it. I feel awkward just like here I'm hawking a book, but this is really
no.
The point of what Kobi was saying about how what you make in a book is half of of what it really is, and the other half is in the mind of the reader. So the incident that really sparks this it's in a block dressed up in red and green, one house shown blue and white. So this one house has a menorah in the window, and all the other houses have Christmas trees. And the boy whose menorah it is, it decides that after, and by the way, this is the point that I'm going to talk about. A stone comes through the window one night. Everybody's sleeping. It's a smash. The window shattered. A stone. And then they're very worried, and what are they going to do? Will they put up the menorah again after the window's fixed? They do. Then the boy's best friend, Teresa, across the street with her Christmas tree in the window, draws a picture of the menorah, puts it up in the window, and then her friends do, and then their friends do. And this actually happened. There was a real Teresa. And within 3 weeks, 10,000 windows, more than 10,000 windows in Billings, Montana, had menorahs up in them.
Wow.
So it was, so here's this book. I mean, it's uplifting it, and it ends on a sort of note of triumph, and it doesn't dwell on the terrible thing,
Right.
But it has it in it, and And the question was that. So what I was, the reason I'm getting to is a friend of mine sent me a picture yesterday. She read this book to her granddaughter, who was 4, who really liked it because she really liked it. And she studied that page with the rock, and she studied and studied. And the grandmother said, "Who do you think did this?" Because when you're 4, you don't have to know, you don't need to know that anti-Semitism, the very large things, it's just a thing that happened. She decided it was a wicked witch that did it, because who else would do that? And I loved that, because that's where picture books can, that shows you that the whole picture is really includes the mind of the reader, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a child who already understands metaphor, right? Right. An analogy.
Maybe. I don't know. I don't think so. I think
No?
it was what she meant,
They
Yeah.
fill
Oh,
in
literally.
what they know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you're right about that. That children will take from a story what they can bear to take.
Mhm.
With their schema, with their background knowledge, they'll make of it what makes sense to them.
Right.
Yeah, I
And,
agree.
and I get that, but I would say that, I think that the children here, there's every faith here at Slate School. I think the kids would be scratching their heads like, why on earth would that happen? Because we all celebrate everything here with everybody.
Well,
No.
that's a question to ponder, right?
Yeah.
Why
Why?
would it
Why on
happen?
earth? Why would that ever happen? Why would that
Yeah.
ever?
Some people just make mischief.
Yeah.
Um, I'm interested in how you all collaborate with collaborators or other artists. How do you like to work with others?
I don't.
You don't at all.
No.
But I know that you and Doe are friends, and you probably talk to each other.
Well, we have I was running a writers group until a couple of months ago. I know Doe was involved in the Shoreline Writers Group. So we have that. But that's more of a critique than a collaboration. I don't know if I could collaborate. Even books that I've only illustrated, I really had very little back and forth with the author. I think they're very separate things. No, I collaborate with my editor. That's or the art director.
Right. Well, that's part of it too.
Yeah.
That's part of it too.
I collaborate heavily with the illustrator. It's definitely a group project between the two of us and our editorial team as well, and the in-house designer too. That so we have a team that does the books that I've authored, and I find it to be like one of my great joys in life, being able to collaborate with another creative that is talented in a completely different way, brings all their perspectives, all of their ways of seeing the world and how they want to bring this into the world. I've had the pleasure, one of my books is being turned into an animated film right now, and getting to collaborate with the animation team and the director and the different aspects of that has been a whole nother level of interesting. So I think, we're just here a little while. As much as we can work with and create community and be part of something that is uplifting, inspiring, and creative, I think that that's just such a, it really blurs the line between work and play. So it really is something that I know I would do for free. It's something that I feel is very fun. And I consider it to be a huge privilege that I get to do that to make a living.
Awesome.
I would agree with that. Whether you work primarily alone or at least at first alone, there's always somewhere along the line some level of engagement with whoever it is that putting your words on the page, especially if you're just a writer as I am. I definitely feel like there's a dance between me and the illustrator, and sometimes it's not even actual. It's just the work of bridging. So I know how to write so that an illustrator can find the pictures, and the illustrator knows how to get the picture out of my story. So I feel deeply indebted to that kind of creativity, and it's a major gratitude for those who put my words in color on the page. Very much so. And I do not have a wife that I read my work to, but I have a long-standing relationship with 7 incredible women who form an 8-woman critique group, and we've been with each other for nearly 30 years now, and they are my first listeners for sure. And that's also a collaboration that deeply develops the stories. It keeps us all out of troubles, and takes us to new places that make our work reach higher heights. And then we put it in the hands of the editor, the illustrator, the book designer. So it's a long and fruitful journey. Thank goodness.
I have to say, there are some editors that do want to collaborate, and there are some that just want you to send them what you got. I like the ones that are willing to go back and forth and give you ideas and all that. And there's just been a small handful of those that I've been able to come across over the years, but that's ideal for me. I think one of the biggest challenges in doing this, at least for me, is what do they want? What do they want from me? And if you have an editor that's sharing what they actually want and working with you, that's a godsend. But they can be hard to find.
What about you, Paul?
Well, I love collaborating, and although, like John said, it's usually not when I'm illustrating it and someone else wrote the book. There's usually not communication directly with the author, and I think that's the standard in this industry, in this country. People who make, say, graphic, comics writers, they can't believe that when they make a picture book and they step into this industry and they, what, you don't communicate? It's all through the editor or the art director. But I think it works pretty well. The interest that is being served is the book and the story, and not really what the author thought it was, which is not necessarily the only and best and ideal version of it. There can be other ways to do it. But I do sometimes, once a book is done, then I have almost always gotten in touch with the author. And by the way, I hope that you other guys can hold up books and talk about specific books, because I want to see them, and I think other people probably would too. So I feel awkward having done this thing with this one book, which I
Oh no, Paul, don't. Please don't.
It was Lee Wind was the author there, and we actually knew each other beforehand, but we didn't. But the editor was who we bounced things off of, and it was, like John said, he's a good editor. Arthur Levine is not a bad editor. He's been responsible for a few things that some people have heard of, like Harry Potter, for instance, and his Dark Materials, Philip Pullman's series, things like little things like that. So anyway, but I've loved sort of having my finger on every stage of the process. So that means collaborating. It's not just with the author, but the art director and how they design it and how they. And then I've been able to go on press in the past when they were domestically printed. That was just a fantastic thing to be there when they were printing. And that's a collaboration too, because you have to decide how to adjust the press. And all the decisions that go into making a book be what it is, it's just really endlessly fascinating.
One of my students actually did a project on book publishing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what children generally find, no matter what the topic is, if it has to do with some kind of a pursuit, something that people do, I think the universal thing that they all come to is that there's art in everything. And that there's an art to delivering the mail, There's an art to making the book, putting the pages together. There's an art to everything. Every pursuit can be done as an artist. And
I'm writing this down right now. It's an art and everything.
yeah, I think they really believe that. One of our educators here had a question for all of you, just sort of asking if there are you don't have to tell us who, but if there are children from your life that have inspired you, and it could have been a classmate 20 years ago, or an experience that you've had. Have there been children that have inspired you to write a book? Have you written a book for someone who needed a book? I see John nodding his head.
Yeah, I did a book series called Bunjitsu Bunny, and there's 4 books, and it's based on, I teach martial arts, and one of my students, Isabel, is really Bunjitsu Bunny. She's the main character in the book. My editor had suggested there's no martial arts books with little girls in there, and she was the perfect person. And she's like 7 in the book, and now she's in college now. But yeah, so that definitely played a role in that series.
I wonder what you what do you hope? I mean, I'm just thinking of each of your wonderful works. What do you hope the reader takes away from a story that you've written or illustrated? Kobi, is it inspiration for you? Inspiration to go forward and make mistakes?
Sure. I think inspiration is part of the DNA of the books that I'm interested in creating. I think it depends on the subject. I want to respect what Paul was asking about. So we did a book called Trying, and really, the whole goal of that book was I wanted to write a book about failure. I think that failure is an aspect of life that happens, that we run away from, that we try to avoid. Yet there's really rich things that come from trying and having things not turn out the way that you wanted, and they're really necessary for building life skills. And so, to say, even with that book, what would I want to have someone taking away is going through a little bit of the emotional journey of that disappointment and that heartbreak, and feeling what it's like to want something, but to not instantly be good at it. A lot of kids, if they can't be great at something, they quit. That resiliency that's needed, that growth mindset that's needed to build over time. A lot of times we measure someone's finished product. Like, take, for instance, you could see Paul's work or John's work, and maybe you want to be an illustrator, and you look at your own and you think, this isn't as good as that. And you're not really seeing the journey, right? You're not seeing the amount of practice time that's been put into that. And so that was the goal of that particular book, was kind of created a conversation between 2 characters. One was a master sculptor, and one was someone that was brand new, being in awe of their work and wondering and wishing if they could do anything as incredible as that. And so that was really the context for a book. But I think that those emotional journeys are important. And as I said, I kind of write for all ages. So I really, the New York School District, for instance, is using that book in the high school instead of the elementary school only. So, and so I think that, where the reader engages is one thing. And I also think there's one other little magical thing that's happening with picture books, which is a lot of times kids are reading this with maybe a teacher or a counselor or a parent. And there's another perspective that comes into the picture too, and that discussion that happens, and what that can be with someone with maybe more life experience and someone with maybe less life experience, and being able to talk about a topic, not just the weather, not just what's going on, but maybe something like failure or ideas, or dealing with problems. Those are really great conversations that I think have the opportunity anyway to stick, and then maybe help develop some of those life skills and give them some of those tools. So So that's kind of the goal. I think it's kind of topic specific, but I think in all cases, for me, it's really about that discussion, and the discussion can be an internal discussion with yourself. I'm not saying that it always has to be between two people, but I do think it's that thought process where we kind of work through those doubts and fears and insecurities we have with all things that we really do, and sort of push past them into things that we're really, really passionate about.
I have two daughters, and they're both college students. One is about to finish her undergraduate experience in about 10 days. And I read that book to her because she is a perfectionist. And it's epidemic among children and college students and high school students. And so I can really see why Trying is a powerful book. It's funny, here at Slate School, we would prefer to see someone come and rehearse than have someone come and perform. Because
it's a nice way to say that, yeah.
So, come and over and over again, play that phrase. And then let us get so excited when you feel, you feel that you've gotten it right. We love to watch people work. We like to watch people struggle, actually, which is kind of
but not gratuitous.
weird thing.
I enjoy seeing sketches, a person sketches, sometimes even more than the finished art. There's life in those, that's along those same lines. That's rehearsal for the final picture.
Yeah.
I taught fourth and fifth grade in a different setting, and kids loved those Leonardo da Vinci diaries. Right? So they could see all of the practice in the margin. They could see all of the attempts that, one not as good, but then a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. John, you write you write a variety of books. I think Doe, you do too. I'm wondering if your process is different for like a nature up close book than.
No. I'm a naturalist, and it took me a long time to figure out how to write books about nature, maybe because I was too close, and it occurred to me that nature is a story. Everything happening in our yards, you have your main characters, you have your setting, you have your problems, you have your solutions, there's danger about being eaten, you got to find food. I mean, those are real adventures happening there. And that's how I approached that series. And my goal is I give them enough to maybe whet their appetite so they want to go out and they want to learn more on their own. I mean, to me, that would just thrill me. If something inspired them to go out in their yard and they want to learn more about these creatures that that live amongst us. So I do approach it as a story and try to develop empathy for those characters, without being, anthropomorphic, but you can still do that. You can do that. So they're very similar approaches.
Awesome.
The difference is in the art, where I feel like if I draw too many legs or something like, I have to get that accurate, because I'll be called on it. I'll get letters, you messed up that frog or whatever. And I do get letters.
That's funny.
Of my mistakes.
That's funny. We call it a window to wonder here. We like to have things that make us wonder more, not answering the questions. We don't want the questions answered. We want to.
There will always be questions. I don't care how much you study. There's always another question.
Yeah. And a new discovery so that your mistakes are revealed, but still it's worth putting it on the paper, even if you are using just what you have available, the most recent science or math that describes what you're doing. I'll hold up Heartbeat and Blink. Heartbeat, I wrote because I was watching a hummingbird, and my son-in-law, James, who is a biologist, mentioned that he had read a recent study about hummingbird heart rates. And all of a sudden I had a book born, right? And the key here was to build the bridge between, what the child understands about their own heart and their own heartbeat and their own heart rate, and then that there are many, many thousands and thousands of creatures in the world who also have circulatory systems and so forth, and heart rates, and how it differs across species. And then Blink was born, out of that. Blink is about the ways that animals see differently, and how our heart rates actually, and our eyes actually are essential to our mastery of being whatever it is that we are, human or animal. So all of the things that John was talking about, just sort of, habitat and predation, and how are you going to get your next meal, and where will you find shelter? All of that is amazingly connected to what we can see and how our hearts work. So yeah, there's always some kind of sense of, curiosity and wonder. And I would just add awe and reverence that I try anyway to bring to my books. And I can't label myself a naturalist as a scientist, really. I'm not that, but I am a nature lover and a wanderer, as I said earlier. So I feel like we're giving kids access and agency, right? When we describe to them these ways that the body and the world work, and how they can have mastery in it. This book is called Hear the Wind Blow. This came out earlier this year, and it's about the visible signs of the wind and the rising and falling of a storm. And it also describes the Beaufort wind force scale, which helps kids to understand, like, when it's time to pick your picnic up and go back from the beach, right? It's mastery. It's a way to just give kids access to engagement with their world. And
you also want to take all that information that you're working with and shape it into something that it may have, if the conflict goes in this part and the art goes like that, but you want to make it into something that feels like it's like you really went somewhere with it, right? So
exactly.
It's not just the subject matter, but it's what you do with it that makes it into an art, I think.
Exactly. Yeah, that certainly is the hope.
So in terms of the arc of children's books, it's taken off. It's gone crazy in the last 15 years. Where do you hope it goes? Do you have any hopes? What would you like to see happen in children's book publishing? I got the beat.
I would like to see it governed by people who love these things for themselves and aren't just thinking about what children need, because there's a way to combine it. I mean, it seems to me that that the best books are appreciated by everybody because they're, like what John said, you write for yourself, right? Not for your 40-year-old self, but there is, you can tell that there's a self who's age appropriate and wants this book, and I think that a lot of books are put out there because of other people's needs, not because of your own understanding of the needs, and I think that doesn't make for the best results.
Yeah, I think the marketing department makes very big decisions, where when I started out, it was the editor who would decide to buy the story and put that out there. But now they're filling a niche, and they have to make money. And I understand that, but it seems like it's got to get past them before it even gets to the editor. And I've been seeing, I remember when that started, and I was a little put off, where the editor said, I really love it, but the marketing department wants you to do this. And what? This should be editorial. And that was a little frustrating. And I'm seeing that a lot. And I think it's the same with, I was speaking to a TV producer, and it's the same with that too. It's, we gotta feed them this, because this is what sells. And the art doesn't come first, the sales come first, but that's the nature of any business. It's just a reality.
I'm in a much different environment that I'm realizing than the standard publishing industry. So, that's kind of disheartening to hear about the marketing and some of those things, just from the standpoint of, what sells, hardly ever makes a great product, as far as that being a filter. But I think that we are served by having less gatekeepers towards what is a success, and a little bit more about why we're making. I think, as much as we can stay focused on the why, the reason for making the book. I'm still bewildered a little that the author doesn't communicate with the illustrator in some of these projects. That to me is even like amazing, because even with Paul describing how he likes to go to the press checks and see what's happening with the art direction, it seems like I wonder where the author is in that picture too. How much they want to see, what the overall end result is. So I think for me, it gets back to that collaboration and really sharing a vision and sharing, the why. So I don't know where the industry will be going, but I think the products will be rewarded when there is a strong sense of purpose and a really clear why. I think those are the kind of products that tend to find themselves in the market. And it's hardly ever the market saying, this is what's going to work. It's usually the market realizing it worked after it's done.
Is there a book that any of you would like to write that you haven't written yet? Is there something that you would just really like to write?
I don't know yet.
Yeah, there's stacks and stacks in a way, Julie, right? We're always kind of brainstorming ideas, starting drafts, making notes. In my office, there are, little notebooks everywhere, just by the dozens, alas, and some of them will be born and some of them will not. But that's okay too,
I have sticky notes all underneath my computer, just ideas. I feel like I have to see them every day. If I write them down and close them in a book, I'm going to forget. So
Good idea.
I like to have things in plain sight, and it could take years. 3 years seems to be the average before one of those little notes, it becomes that's what I meant. But yeah, there's a lot I would like to do, and I just haven't figured out how to do it yet.
Yeah, or how to do it all, right?
Mhm.
And some things have a longer gestation.
Yeah.
You need to work it out inside of your mind for a while, and maybe you don't actually know everything that you need to know yet for you to get it down on paper, but you take that time, let it gel.
And sticky notes don't stick forever. They fall off after a while.
Well, there's a bunch also sitting underneath like fallen leaves.
Like Florida.
That's great.
Well, I'm glad to hear that these three esteemed creators don't have like 100 things that they've already got in the can ready to go, because I've never experienced that. But I think that it is part of the process and a little bit of the journey, that you don't quite know what you're doing tomorrow, as far as creatively something new sparking. And I think that's half of the fun of creating something is, you don't know if you're going to get that little spark on a walk, on a trip, in Europe, in your backyard, where it's going to be. But, it's a lot of fun when it arrives, that you get to try to chase it down and see what you can make of it.
And once you start a new thing, it's like a whole new world opens up too. It's the opportunity to talk about what Doe was saying, learning that it's the opportunity to learn all about things. It sounds like actually what you're doing at Slate School too, it's very much the same thing.
It is a little bit like
That a
that.
topic of a new book. I mean, a book of, about a moose, and I didn't really know much about moose, but I had to.
That's a big favorite here, Paul.
make-
That's a huge favorite here.
I learned lots of things about moose, even though it's kind of a cartoony book and doesn't show, but it was fun, and it helped.
There is that exhilaration when it does finally click. This is what I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's a funny thing here. We are all studying our own separate things, but what we notice is that whatever you're studying, just like the topic for one of your books, that you find connections to that all day long.
Yeah.
Everything reminds you of that. Oh, that's just like that's just like llamas. That's just like wheat. That's just, whatever it is. And I think it's such a great thing for kids to experience, because it makes the world big and small at the same time. And I think
teachers find those connections too. That's one thing teachers do.
Yeah, you're right. We do. We try to facilitate that. Well, I want to thank you on behalf of our community, on behalf of our children here at Slate School, and children and adults everywhere. We've all been inspired by your work and delighted by it. And I just hope you'll keep making wonderful things for us to read and to see, and then that you'll all come and visit us here at Slate School, because that would be spectacular.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
we say at the end of all of our meetings, signing off here, we just say positive rice to everyone tonight. Positive rice.
Positive
Have a wonderful
rice.
Positive rice. Positive rice. Positive rice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have a great night. Thank you so much, all of
You
you.
too.
Wonderful.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Julie.
everybody. Nice to meet you all.
Nice
Good
meeting
night,
you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Night, everyone.
Happy writing.
Happy writing.
Thanks.
Happy writing.